Alrighty, good morning, small business owners. And today we're going to be talking about S corporations. But before we begin, let me introduce myself. My name is Josh from the University of Verne Small Business Development Center, and I am the host of this SBDC podcast. And here at the SBDC, we help small businesses start and grow with free one-on-one consulting and free resources just like this podcast. And as always, you can see all the links and resources I mentioned in this episode down in the show notes below. So like I said, we're going to be talking about S corporations. So if you're looking to incorporate your business, and then you may have heard of an S corporation before. It's a great way to protect yourself and save on some taxes. But if you've never done this before, you're probably asking yourself, now how can I get started as an S corp? And what do I need to know? So in this episode, we'll unravel the enigma of S corporations, and I'll show you how to set one up. But before we begin, I want to let you know we can check out our on-demand library at Laverne SBDC at learnworlds.com for practical and informative courses on how to start and run a business. So let's take a look at some courses. We can see what we have. And really, it's anything from, forming an LLC, filing licenses and permits. All of our training courses are designed to help any small business owner get started or grow. So check that out in the show notes below. All right, the first thing we need to talk about is what is an S corp. And so an S corp, or a subchapter S corporation, is an interesting business entity. It starts out as a corporation, and it is a corporation that gives you legal separation, just like a C corp, and it generally provides tax benefits that are passed through, kind of like a sole proprietorship. So there are a few characteristics that you might want to understand about it. So if you are going to start as a S corporation, you're going to need to understand that you can only have 100 shareholders. It needs to be a domestic corporation, meaning it needs to be located in the state of California, as we're talking about California. You also need to make sure that the shareholders are individuals. They can't be non-resident aliens. They have to be citizens. And they can't be other things, meaning they can't be partnerships. They can't be other corporations. And they can be certain trusts, but you need to make sure about that. And then there are certain types of businesses that can only be S corporations, and an ineligible corporation that cannot be an S corporation are going to be certain financial institutions, insurance companies, and domestic international sales corporations, rather. So, now that you understand what an S corporation is, let's get to setting up one. But there is one thing we need to understand before we actually start filing and forming an S corporation, and that's going to be something called an agent for the service of process, which is also known as a registered agent. So, what is a registered agent? Well, a registered agent, or an agent for the service of process, is somebody who takes in official paperwork like subpoenas or tax notices and other official paperwork about the corporation. And so if you need to have a registered agent, just like you would for any corporations, limited liability companies, limited partnerships, you need to actually have a registered agent listed in your filings. And so what you would need to do is you need to have that person available and ready to put on the formation documents before you actually kind of file and get those articles of incorporation filed to the Secretary of State. And so you can do it as a member of the corporation, like a director, CEO, or something like that, but they need to be available during business hours most days. So if somebody does come in and service your business, they will be able to take it. Or you can actually have a business who act as your registered agent. Now, the advantage to that is going to be that registered agent can use their address for the business if you are a home-based business and you want to keep your home address out of the public record. It is legal. It is available for home-based businesses to take advantage of, and so that is something that you want to think about, how you want to set up the registered agent for your particular kind of business and corporation. But that is pretty much it for all the pre-things that we need to do before we start filing for the S corporation. So let's go to forming the corporation. So we're going to go to bizfileonline.sos.ca.gov. This is the California Secretary of State business registration and filing portal. And what we'll do is we're going to form a corporation, or at least I'm going to show you how you can form a corporation. And so what you'll need to do is you'll need to log in or have a registered account with the Secretary of State. I happen to have one already. And so what we'll do is once you have one, we'll go to Forms. And what we're going to be looking for is going to be Articles of Incorporation, General Stock. And so what you'll need to understand is that there is a filing fee for the corporation. That's going to be $100 here. And there's some other things that you're going to need to think about once you file the Articles of Incorporation that we're going to talk about a little bit later once we get through this form. But we'll file online, and here we are. Here is the formation portal and documents. And so the first thing we need to understand is that these are going to be public filings. So anytime you put any information here, it's going to be public record that you can search for on the Secretary of State's website, and you don't need to be registered. So the next thing we're going to be doing is you'll need to put in your name of the submitter, who's forming this corporation, name, email address, and phone number to get a hold of you. Then we'll use the corporation name. Now, if you've reserved a name ahead of time, you'll use that. If you haven't, you can just search for it and make sure that that name is available for your business. And then once we have that set up, we have our address. So it's going to be the physical address of the business. And we can also set up a mailing address for the corporation if needed. Now, for doing an agent of service of process, you'll still need to put this in, but that address will revert to the registered agent for that purpose. So then we'll go to the directors. Now, if you've named directors already, you can put them here. If you haven't named directors, don't worry about it. That's usually not a common thing. Usually do that after you form the business. Then we have the agent for the service of process, so the registered agent. If it's going to be an individual within the business, you'll put their information here. If it is a service that you'll need to work with, you'll need to make sure that they're going to be the registered agent of record, and that they've actually agreed to use their name for the registered agent, and then you can put in their information here so you can find them because they need to be registered with the state of California to be a registered agent. Alrighty, so the next thing is going to be shares of stock. Now you can put in any amount of shares that you'd like, but remember you can only have 100 individual shareholders. So you'll need to think about that when you do that. And then class of stock. Now with C corporations, there's two different classes of stock. You have general stock and you have preferred stock. If you're doing an S corporation, one is going to be fine. Most corporations do not have more than one class or series of shares, so we can just put no. The purpose statement is we're going to be engaging in lawful activity of business in the state of California. And then if you'd like, you can create the current date that we're going to file for you to be in business or formed as a corporation, or you can do a future filing date if you'd like. Here are any attachments for your business if you need to add attachments. Here's where we'll review all the information about the business that we have put in. If we have one signature, if you're filing this on your own, then you would put one signature. If you're filing this as multiples, as a partnership, or if you're going to have a business partner, you may have multiple signatures, in which case you would use this for setting that up. And for the processing fee, again, they'll take Visa and MasterCard. It's going to be $100 for a filing fee for the corporation. And note, there is a minimum $800 tax for this corporation. We'll talk about that a little bit later when we talk about maintaining the corporation. And if you'd like, there are extra fees if you want to get a certified copy of this for your business and get it expedited to you. And so once we have the signatures, you can add a signer and you can send out for signatures or form the corporation. Once you file this, you have formed a corporation. Congratulations. But there are a few other things that you're going to need to understand. And one of those things is going to be a statement of information. Now, you'll need to do a statement of information for LLCs and corporations, and you'll need to do this as soon as possible, but within 90 days. There's some information that you'll need to file the statement of information. So the first thing you're going to need to file the statement of information is your actual document number that you filed. So here is a statement of information, SI 550. And what you'll need to understand about this statement of information is that you'll need to file it within 90 days after the initial registration. A lot of people don't do this, and they need to understand that they need to do this. It's going to be $25 to file, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but you'll need to keep up with this every year. So what you'll need to have to file the statement of information is going to be your corporation name, exactly how it was registered. In the portal that you can actually file this in the portal. And so what you'll do is you'll log in, you'll put in the corporation name, and it'll come up and you can fill out all that information online instead of having to do this form. This form is easier to see what information is there because you actually have to have that corporation formed before you see any of this. And so this is just an easier visual way for you to see what information you need. So next thing is going to be the Secretary of State entity number. That's going to be that filing number for the corporation. Physical address, mailing address, street address of the principal California office. Again, you're going to need to know all of these of the executive office as well if there's multiple offices. And then the next thing you're going to want to understand is that there's going to be a chief executive officer, secretary, or chief financial officer, and any other directors. Now, remember, in the formation, it asked you if there was any directors. And I told you that it's not common to have directors already chosen to form the business, which is true. But you may need to form them afterwards, in which case you want to have those ready so that when you file this within 90 days of forming the corporation, you'll have this information ready. And then you'll make sure that all the information from your initial formation is all correct, and then we'll file this. So, now remember I said about the directors. There's some other things you'll need to understand about forming the corporation that you need to take into account. One of those things is going to be corporate bylaws. And what corporate bylaws are going to be the rules of running your corporation. Meeting minutes, and let's take a look at some of this stuff. Who the registered agent is, how the directors are going to be chosen, or meetings and other things, what's called remuneration, and loans, indemnification, shares, how shares are going to be distributed, and just a bunch of other rules that you can take a look at with the link down in the show notes. But one of the other things you'll need to understand about the corporation is you'll need to form the corporation and have directors and maybe some officers and start making meetings. And in the corporation, everything's kind of done like a committee, but if you're a single person, you'll be doing all this all yourself. But if you do have some directors, you'll be meeting with them and resolving to do certain things. One of the things you're going to be resolving is having the articles of incorporation, adopting the bylaws, and figuring out who your directors are, which is what you'll do. And once you do that, you can put that information here in the statement of information. But one of the other things you'll need to do is you'll also need to meet with the board of directors and understand all of these things. Have the articles of incorporation, do the bylaws, resolutions, which we just went over, the bill of sale for shares of stock if you're selling stock to other people, the stock certificates, and the record book for all of the transactions and some other records that you'll need to be keeping. And also salaries and percentages of the business if they're held by other people as directors or officers and things like that. So again, we're not completely done with forming the corporation. One of the other things you need to understand about forming a corporation is you'll need to have some kind of separation between you as an owner and the business, which means different bank accounts. You're going to be a separate entity, you have to have separate bank accounts. So no commingling of funds or anything else like that between you and the business. So one of the other things you'll need to resolve is you'll need to open up a bank account. But before you open up the bank account, you also need to choose a bank account, choose a kind of account, which is what this information is. And then you'll need to file what's called an EIN so that you have a separate tax number that banks can look at to approve your bank registration to get a bank account. And so that's what this is here. If you want to learn more about how to file an EIN, either for a sole proprietorship, LLC, or even a corporation like this, you can actually check out our Learn Worlds library so that you can actually see how to do that. It takes you through step by step. It's going to be a little bit different because we do it as a sole proprietorship. With the corporation, it's going to be a little bit more complicated, but the questions will be according to however the business is going to be set up. So if you're a corporation, questions are going to be a little bit different, but at least you have that information so you can follow along and actually create your EIN and register it with the IRS. And that's basically everything you need to set up the corporation. But up until now, we've only been creating what's called a C corporation. Now you're probably looking at me, it's like, wait, I did all this to create a C corporation. How do I get to the S corporation? Well, setting up an S corporation, you're gonna have to file one more form so you can convert that C corporation and be taxed as an S corporation. And that's basically all it is. It's gonna be a tax election. So let's go to the form you're gonna need to file to set up the S corporation. And the S corporation election form that you're going to need to do is going to be Form 2553. And what Form 2553 does is it takes your information as a corporation and it tells the IRS that you want to be taxed as an S corporation, which allows for pass-through taxation. And so what we'll do is we'll need to put in some information from your corporation, just like normal. And right here, you'll have the name of the corporation, the street number, and your address of everything. The other thing you'll also need to have is your EIN number, which we already did if you followed these instructions. the date of incorporation, and the state where it was incorporated. So once we have all of this stuff set up, the next thing you're going to have to understand is the tax year. How are you going to be taxed? When are you going to be doing your taxes? And when are you be doing your what's called the fiscal year? Now you can have the fiscal year as the calendar year here, so January through December, or you can have a specific fiscal year that ends, from September, from October to September, which is the federal fiscal year, or like here at the university, we do something, I believe it's around August to July because it's closely according to the actual academic year. But if you don't know how you're going to be doing that, you might want to have an accountant set this up for you, or somebody who is going to be keeping your books so they understand what the fiscal year is actually going to be. The next thing we're going to be doing is the legal representative or the officer who is going to be actually doing this information and who they can call if they have any questions. You'll need to file this stuff as soon as possible if you're going to be electing the 2553 and the S corporation. If you don't do this within the year, you're going to be what's called a late filing, and then if you decide to do it later, you'll need to explain to the IRS why you're filing late. And so if you have an accountant who is doing stuff, they may be able to explain this better to the IRS than you probably would if you do intend to file late for some reason. And then signatures here, there's more. So for this, you're going to need to put in the directors or your officers and the shareholders if they are the same thing, and you'll need to put in the information that they consent to being a S corporation, how much stock they own, the percentage of the business that they own, the date acquired, any social security numbers, and just information about who the shareholders are. You'll also need to understand about the fiscal tax year. We talked about that, but if you're reverting to another one, then you'll need to make sure you have that information there if you're going to be changing it for any reason. This is for trusts. If you're not a trust, don't worry about it. And then here is the rules for the late filing that you'll need to put in back up here if you are late filing and forming the S corporation later than you should have. I know that's a lot of information, and again, like I said, if you're going to be converting the S corporation, then you may want to have an accountant do this for you who understands what the laws are, what the rules are, so that you won't get caught up with any errors and get any trouble with the IRS. So that's forming the S corporation. We're basically done. Now there's some other things that you'll need to do to start maintaining the S corporation and things you'll need to do to basically operate. And that's what we're going to be doing next. We're going to talk about maintaining and operating your S corporation. So one of the things that you'll need to understand about maintaining and operating your S corporation, there are going to be some filings that you'll need to do to keep up with the S corporation. And so we already talked about one or two that you might need to worry about. One of the filings that you'll need to do is going to be the statement of information. Now, we went over this. As I said, it was going to be 90 days of initial registration after you file your articles of incorporation, but then every year after. So every year on the particular date of your filing, you'll need to file a statement of information for the corporation to make sure that it is up to date, to let the state know that things haven't changed or have changed. And so you're probably asking, well, what do you mean change? So here we have a table of the statement of information. And so if we have a statement of information, we will need to file this every year. So if you started in January, around the time of January, you'll have this filing period to actually file the statement of information. And again, if things have changed, if the address has changed, if the officers have changed, you'll need to make sure that you update that information and that it is filed. One of the other things you'll need to understand is that there are some other forms you'll need to file, which are called disclosures. Now, what are disclosures? Disclosures can be the annual meeting minutes of the board of your directors and maybe some financial information for the business. So every year, you'll need to have what's called an annual meeting of the board of directors. Now, we had the initial meeting before when we formed the corporation, but now you'll need to make an annual meeting of the board of directors. If you're a single member corporation, you'll just have to fill this stuff out yourself, that you were present, and what the actual motions and the resolutions were. And there's going to be a treasury report. These are going to be based on your financials that you are keeping for the business, if they were prepared by you or prepared by an accountant, and you'll need to put this information in here so that you can report this for your business. And if there are any other issues that you are talking about, here is where that information will be located. And you'll need to file this along with your statement of information to show that you actually are keeping up with the corporation. The final thing you want to talk about, or that we want to talk about for you, is going to be the franchise tax. Now, we're going to get into taxes in a little bit, but the franchise tax is something that you need to understand because it's very, very important. And so when we talk about the franchise tax, we're going to be talking about an $800 minimum tax that we showed you when you formed the corporation. We're going to get into a little bit and how that works in California. So, but to let you understand, there's going to be a franchise tax, at least $800 every single year, whether or not you make money. And that's something that California has mandated for LLCs and corporations. But that's basically it for the annual stuff that you'll need to understand about maintaining the corporation and getting things situated so you can keep going on and on year after year. But now let's talk about taxes. I know taxes is a really big thing, and a lot of people will, really just, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're talking about taxes. Now, disclaimer, I am not a tax accountant. I don't really know much about taxes, but I do understand what you need to do for taxes. So let's talk about that. So for the S corporation, a lot of people understand that it has more tax advantages than a C corporation. And one of those advantages is that in most cases, S corporations don't have a corporate tax. Not like C corporations do. But, so let's take a look at that for a second. So C corporations in California have an 8.84% corporate tax rate. And with corporations on the federal level have a 21% corporate tax rate. And so these are basically standard across the board. If you're doing a C corporation, this is what you're going to have to contend with. What we need to understand is that S corporations are going to work a little bit differently. And so how S corporations work is that we have pass-through, and for every S corporation in California, there's going to be a little bit difference. So the S corporation has a 1.5% income tax in California. Now, in most other states, this income tax doesn't exist. But in California, it does. And for a lot of different C corporations in the United States, They usually pick an S corporation because of the tax benefits and the pass-through, and you get away from actual corporate tax. California, that's really not so. Again, there's an $800 minimum tax, but as you are making more money, that's going to be a 1.5% tax. And so you'll get some kind of quasi double taxation for California. It is not really any different than anywhere else, and even with C corporations. So that might be something you want to think about when forming an S corporation here in California. The S corporation does have less taxes than the C corporation, but how much less tax? You can see it here. That's something that you'll need to understand for your business and to see what makes the most sense for your type of corporation. And so one of the other things that you need to think about when it comes to taxes is the idea of how you're taxed in the corporation. And so how you're taxed in the corporation is pretty simple. In the C corporation, you have a corporate tax, and then you also have your personal tax for the business. With the S corporation, there's pass-through, and so you're going to be set up as an employee, and then you're going to have dividends or distributions from the corporation itself. So you're going to have salary and what's called a K1, and we'll talk about the K1 in a little bit. But the first thing we need to understand is, well, what am I going to set up for myself as my salary? Well, there's some rules behind that. And so one of the rules is that you need to have what's called a reasonable salary. And so what is a reasonable salary? Can I just name the reasonable salary myself, or is there a certain way to do it? Yes and no. So a reasonable salary basically is a paycheck comparable to what employers would look for similar services. There's additional profit in the business. You'll take that distribution, what's called the K1, and we'll talk about that. But for the most part, how is the salary determined? So the salary is determined by a lot of things. And in fact, if you have an accountant who is doing a lot of these filings for you, as far as the 2553 and setting up the S corporation, they will be able to help you also determine the reasonable salary. And like I said, the reasonable salary is determined by training and experience, duties and responsibilities, time and effort, and a bunch of these different factors that the accountant will need to take into consideration when naming the salary for the filings. And so you'll have to understand what all this stuff does, and you can do some research and figure out what a reasonable salary is, and then you can also have that range so that you can report to the IRS for your taxes. But now let's talk about filing taxes. So we talked about what taxes and things you'll need to understand about the business. Let's talk about filing taxes for the business and for yourself, because that's really going to be another cost that you'll need to incur for setting up your business or maintaining the business. And so let's talk about filing taxes federally. So filing taxes federally for your S Corp is going to do a specific form. It's called an 1120S. Now, for federal, for corporations, it's, I believe, the 1120, but this is the S version for S corporations. And really, this information is going to be pretty standard and pretty close to what the C corporation is asking for, but for S corporations. And so you have the effective date, you form the S corporation. Here you have your NAICS code. We also have name, number and address of the business, your employer identification number, because we did need to file that and form that before we started filing our taxes, and we'll need that when filing taxes and filing W-2s for employees if you do need to do that. Your date of incorporation and the total assets. Now, before you actually start filing the S corporation, as for the annual meetings, you'll need to have some financial documents. The two financial documents that you're going to need at least to start filling all this stuff out is going to be an income statement or P&L for the year, and then also a balance sheet for the year. And you're going to take a lot of that information and fill it out here. So if we go a little bit lower, this income section, this is going to be where your gross revenue and profit and loss and things are going to be here. Then you'll have compensation for officers, and a lot of this other stuff may be from your balance sheet. And then you may also have some other tax things that you'll need to understand. If you're a product business or a service business, you'll have to understand where to put this information. And again, if you have an accountant or a tax accountant who's going to be doing this for you, it is highly recommended. If you don't know how to do this yourself, do this, have an accountant do this for you. And so you'll put in your signatures, and then a little bit lower, we're going to be doing other information. How is your business keeping track of their finances? Is it cash accounting or accrual accounting? Those are things and questions you'll need to ask your accountant because they're going to be the ones keeping the books. What is your business activity? Products and services. If you have corporations who own your parts of your business, which S corporations can't, you would put that information here, or any other individuals who own a certain amount of stock, 20% or more. Then we have restricted stock, non-restricted stock, how that works. Again, if you don't have any of this information, you may want to engage with an accountant to have this information for you and fill this stuff out for you. Then we have the Schedule K. Now this is where the K1 comes out. These are going to be the information for the K that you'll do for distributions. This is the information, and at the very end, you'll have to understand what your distributions are for your business for all the directors or the shareholders. Then at the bottom right here, we have our Schedule L, which is going to be the balance sheet. And so that's where that information is going to be coming from. And then any other losses, gains, and shareholder information. And that's basically it for the 1120S. It's pretty daunting, like I said, so if you have somebody who is going to be doing this for you, please, please, please have somebody do this for you because it's very, very daunting if you don't know how to do it yourself. So once you have this information for the income statement and for the S corporation, you'll want to, and you have some distributions and your salary and W-2, you'll do this for your 1040, which is your individual tax return. You'll do this for yourself once you have that information for your taxes. And that's basically it. It's just like filing taxes like normal for every year after. Now, the other thing we need to understand is going to be the state side. So that's just for federal. That's all the stuff you'll need to do for federal. On the state side, we have the 100S. 100 is for corporations. The 100S is going to be for the S corporation. And really, it's a copy of the corporate tax form, the 1120S. A lot of this information is going to be very, very similar. So if you formed and filled out your 1120S for the S corporation, this 100S will be very, very, very similar. So you'll put in the information. Again, we have it just like the 1120S, adjustments and business codes. Here we have our gross receipts and the P&L stuff. And then right under that, we have our balance sheet stuff. And that's pretty much it. Again, profits and losses on the books, and any other adjustments from the K1. Now, you'll need to make sure that you review what tax advantages you have, just like I said, when forming the corporation, because it may not be the best for your business or for your business right now. There may be some advantages later, but you'll need to understand what those are before you start getting into forming an S corporation and find out there's no advantage for you in the long run. Now, Something you need to understand about corporations and even S corporations, they tend to cost more, and there's a lot more work involved in many businesses. So again, we talked about a lot of this forming and a lot of forms and the meeting minutes and all that stuff. That's going to cost you time and money. And more so if you need to have some help with the use of a lawyer or an accountant to do a lot of this stuff for you. If you want to do it yourself, you can, but again, it's going to take a lot of time, and you'll need to understand what the forms are going to be and how to file them every year. If you engage with a lawyer or an accountant, they can set up the entity, they can set up your payroll, they can do all this stuff, but it's going to cost you more money in the long run. But it's going to cost you less headache because somebody's going to be doing it for you. So you'll need to weigh those pros and cons and that cost-benefit analysis for the type of business that you want to engage in. But if you're looking to do a lot of this stuff yourself, you can meet with a consultant here at the University of La Verne SBDC, or even your local SBDC in your area, wherever your business is located. You can sign up and schedule an appointment with them so you can get started with that business. But if you found this information helpful, leave us a like on this video and subscribe to the channel where you can follow our podcast and get updates when our next episode goes live. And if you have a question, you can drop a comment down below. And if you have any ideas for future episodes, let us know in the comments down below. I'm Josh from the University of La Verne Small Business Development Center, and we'll see you in the next episode.